knew about the violence and when he knew about it. This is exactly what happened in the Watergate investigation.
Nick,
came in.
We have some clues, though, because Don Jr.'s text leaked, and it would seem, unless you think it was an elaborate hoax at the time, it would seem that when he was privately talking to Mark Meadows, he thought the violence was bad. He thought it should stop. That makes him, interestingly, a kind of familial witness against his father, who did not act like it should stop, did not intercede during the violent emergency, which gives context to the other bit of news I mentioned, more tapes from Kevin McCarthy where he talks about the atrocious conduct of Donald Trump. Again, maybe easy to forget a year plus later, but at the time, days out of the 6th, Kevin McCarthy thought Donald Trump would need a pardon for crime. Let's take a listen to that new tape.
You know, I think the options that have been cited by the Democrats so far are the 25th Amendment, which is not exactly an elegant solution here.
That takes too long, too. It could go back to the House, right?
Yeah, and correct. If the president were to submit a letter overruling the cabinet and the vice president, it's a 2/3 vote in the House and Senate to overrule the president. So it's kind of inartful. Obviously, impeachment has been discussed, and then I think they want him to resign, which I don't see happening either. But members are talking about it.
Nick?
Yeah, well, clearly, Kevin McCarthy at the time thought that what Donald Trump was doing was inciting the violence, was criminal. But it comes down to what you can prove. I mean, Don Jr. is not going in there and saying that my father was inciting the violence and trying to push the violence in order to stop the count of the Electoral College vote. What you see is an email where he basically almost says, this has gone too far. Politically, this is not good for you. It's time to call off the dogs. That's what he's saying. He's not saying that there was no violence.
I'm going to jump in, Nick. Oh, I think that's a fair point, but let's unpack that a little, because you're referring to that very bad text. I mean, it looks bad because he says, he warns, this will define my father's legacy. That's a bad thing. And what we have now, a year and a half later, is this is the legacy they're defending, Nick. I mean, how does the committee and ultimately the DOJ look at the fact that the public statements since that time show an embrace, a move towards the criminal rioters?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, what we're seeing is, we don't know all the proof that the committee has at this point. We don't know what they have about Donald Trump's knowledge and what he knew at the time this was going on. But yes, I think that's where this evidence is heading, and that's what they're looking for. Even with Peter Navarro, it all started out by him saying that they didn't like the violence because it kind of screwed up their plan to stop the Electoral College vote. Well, that's not true. This is all part of a concerted effort that started right from Peter Navarro. I'm sure that Ivanka, I'm sure that Don Jr., and I'm sure that Ivanka's husband went in there and said nothing about Donald Trump's knowledge about the violence. It is, to me, what they are doing is a PR stunt. They're trying to put on the best possible face they can on this for Donald Trump. And they're going in line, just like a lot of the witnesses did in the Watergate trial, Watergate investigation, and then wound up being prosecuted for perjury. Now, keep in mind.
And the final question I have for you again. Well, Nick, I want to get in one more. I want to get in one more thing. I know we're on a slight tape delay because I'm out here in the field. But the last thing is, you mentioned Watergate, where there was initially a united kind of wall of opposition, and the cracks came. Do you see anything here where? How can it be that Mr. Meadows and Mr. Navarro and Mr. Bannon, who awaits trial, have valid claims to executive privilege if the president's own family, who worked in the White House, waived privilege? Which is it?
There's no executive privilege here. There is no executive privilege for plotting an insurrection and a coup. End of story. And the Supreme Court dealt with that back in 1974 in the Nixon tape case. That is just a bogus issue and something else that they're hiding behind in order to not come forward with the truth. And if they don't come, if they use that, then they're going to lie and perjure themselves. It's one or the other. So I think what you're going to find here is a lot of this evidence that's being gathered right now, including all of this testimony, is going to be sent to the DOJ once this committee has completed its report. This is exactly what we got from the Watergate Committee during our investigation. All of the testimony, all of the interviews were all turned over to the prosecutor's office, and we use that in terms of our investigation and prosecutions.
Counselor, as always, we appreciate your expertise and experience. Good to see you, Nick Ackerman. There's a lot going on in the country. The Republican Party dealing with the earthquake out of Ohio. We have the former Democratic Party chair, Governor Howard Dean, on what happens in Ohio and the problems for the Republican Party next.
What the West needs to be doing.
Tell me how this ends.
Only with victory. We have no way out.
Endocrine neoplasia syndrome type 2. Stop Trulicity and call your doctor.
Highest point since the pandemic struck 2 years ago. The Fed will likely follow today's move with the fastest pace of hikes in 30 years. Senators want to know how merchants are affected by an increase in interchange fees or swipe fees by credit card companies. Visa and MasterCard charge businesses a fee for every transaction. Last year, merchants paid out more than $77 billion in credit card fees and more than $28 billion in debit card fees. 3 Native American tribes in South Dakota have been awarded grants through the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program. They are among 19 grants totaling nearly $77 million being awarded in 10 states. The money will fund internet use and adoption projects to improve health care, workforce development, education, housing, and social services in tribal communities.
Well, not much need for your sunglasses out there today.
No, it's very cool and very cloudy. Yeah.
Jay's working on that 7-day forecast.
First, here's a look at your local stocks.
Time to start your lawn and garden projects with 11% off.
Time. Allison Braun, a first-time home buyer in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, learned the hard way that with low inventory and high competition, those trying to purchase a home don't have much leverage these days.
To be quite honest, I did not expect it to be this difficult to get a home.
A pricey housing market could be about to get worse. Homeowners and prospective home buyers across America will likely find some tough sledding ahead because interest rate hikes mean it will be more expensive to borrow money. If you're trying to buy a home, experts say, the asking price may not be much higher than it is now, but
the cost to buy that house is going to be higher because mortgage rates are going up.
That means many new homeowners will not only be paying higher interest on their mortgages, but could also get less house for their money. What about renters?
Renters could be indirectly affected by interest rate hikes to the extent that, let's say, a landlord has to pay a higher rate on his mortgage if he has an adjustable rate mortgage or thought, he or she could refinance and can't, for example. That could get passed along to renters.
But higher interest rates won't affect just homeowners. What about paying off your credit card, car loan, or student debt?
If you've got credit card debt, it's going to cost you more. If you're buying a car, it's going to cost you more because the rates of to borrow that money to get that car is going to go up.
Experts say there could be some good news for people who have significant money stashed in savings accounts. With the new interest rate hike, they say, those accounts will start to earn interest again. But analysts warn it may not be enough interest to make much of a difference.
You might see the interest that's being paid on a savings account go up a touch as a result of the announcement today. But remember, it still may be below the pace of inflation.
So what can many of us do to brace for these higher interest rates that are coming? The analysts we spoke to say if you can hold off on that major purchase of a house or a car that you've been thinking about, Hold that off for as long as you can. For some, they say, it's time to think outside the box regarding your living situation. Living with relatives or sharing a residence with anyone else, they say that can help you ride out some of these rate hikes, Wolf, and people are going to have to start thinking of that in the months ahead. There's going to be more interest rate hikes coming.
Brian Todd reporting for us. Brian, good explanation. Thank you very, very much. Just ahead, with the U.S. Supreme Court apparently poised to strike down Roe versus Wade, President Biden sounds the alarm, warning other rights could be at risk as well. Stay with us. You're in the Situation.
Faced Final Jeopardy, and this
in our one-of-a-kind outfits. Visit Love Marlowe at Lake Lorraine on Marion Road.
You're much more aggressive. So could you talk about the thinking that's behind that? Thank you.
So, look, I think what you've seen in some ways about how many students we can expect to be on campus in the fall.
The pandemic is partially to blame, but FAFSA filings were declining before COVID, down 11% in the last full pre-pandemic year. That doesn't necessarily mean fewer students will attend college, but according to the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center, enrollments did drop by about 3% this past year, accounting for 465,000 fewer students. DeBaun suspects the current job market is enticing young people away from academic pathways, the exact opposite of what happened during our last recession.
When wages are high, like they are now, and when jobs are abundant, then the cost of foregoing the opportunity to be in the workforce is high for students, right? That is especially true for students from low-income backgrounds.
Affordability is another critical factor. According to NCAN's research, only half of two-year community colleges are affordable for the average Pell Grant recipient, just a quarter of four-year institutions. The cost of an education is going up, its relative value is going down, and something has to change.
The post-secondary educational experience can't exist in a vacuum anymore. We really need to be connecting students to their next best step after college.
Sort of counterintuitively, the number of applications going out to colleges year over year is actually increasing. It went up 10% last year, 10% the year before that, up 150% in the last 2 decades. It appears it's a number of factors in play here, but the main one seems to be it's the same kids sending out more applications to more colleges. A whole generation of students being led to believe that college is really tough to get into when, for most universities and institutions, that's not really the case. And this is bad for both parties because colleges have more applications to go through. They might not get to the right students in time, especially during hiring crises. And it's bad for the students because they have to spend more money and sort of spread out their efforts instead of focusing in on the one college they wanted to go to.
Yeah, so more applications, less enrollment. All right, Paul, thank you for that. Well, for more on the college enrollment decline, we have Brian Taylor of
as a bloody day, and certainly not the day to forget.
Weapons. Do you have what you need? Do you need more, and what do you need?
We have the key weapons without which we could not deoccupy the cities like Mariupol. We have a big issue. Russia blocked all the trade routes, and we cannot export our wheat. They occupied our ports, and they're taking out our goods. And I don't want to say this now. I don't want to name specific countries who is behind our backs, making these deals to buy our grain from Russia that was stolen from Ukraine.
Can you tell me who is trying to buy this?
Not now, but we have the names of these countries. But if they will do it, of course we'll tell.
How important is it that President Biden come to Kyiv to see Bucha or Dianka, what has happened here?
It's important. I think it's very important. Because, you know, in our minds, in our society, the President Biden is the president of the biggest democratic civilization for Ukrainians, for our understanding. Yeah, that's it, that our partners, strategic partners. And I think that it would be a great signal, very important signal. Johnson came. I'm just thinking that it's also very good for him, That is good for him because United States support us. So I mean that the president of the country which support us, I think is good for him to be here. If it's possible, I don't know.
Well, Speaker Pelosi came.
Yes, so it's possible.
Tell me how this ends.
Тільки перемога.
Only with victory. We have no way out.
Mr. President, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Slava Ukraini.
Well, thank you. You can catch more of Griff's exclusive interview Saturday on Fox News Live, noon Eastern, right here on Fox News Channel. Up next, trying to find out who leaked the U.S. Supreme Court draft opinion on Roe versus Wade. It is a Washington whodunit now. First, beyond our borders tonight. Israel honors its soldiers and civilians killed in wars and militant attacks, with sirens wailing nationwide for Memorial Day. Ceremonies and poetry readings were held at cemeteries for the more than 24,000 people lost in Israel's conflicts. South Korean and Japanese officials say North Korea has launched a ballistic missile toward its eastern waters. It comes days after leader Kim Jong-un vowed to speed up development of nuclear weapons and threatened to use them against rivals. And the National Football League announces its international schedule for the coming season. It features the league's first regular season game in Germany, with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers facing the Seattle Seahawks November 13th. There will be 3 games in England in October and 1 in Mexico in November. To some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back.
A lot of BS, not much loyalty to the United States of America. Slick. Now, you've asked all the right questions in your lead-in, and the answer is nobody knows the answer to these questions. Unlike 2016, where I thought Trump might win, I actually hope that Trump is the nominee this time. He is incredibly divisive. He exhausts people. He's in deep criminal trouble, and it's going to take a long time, apparently, before that gets sorted out. But I also think his brand is wrecked. First of all, his brand is in bad shape, except for his base. And your numbers, your analysis of the numbers of Vance's race is very, it was a very weak field. Josh Mandel has lost 3. I mean, people look for excuses not to vote for Josh Mandel. He's a toxic candidate. And then the other 2 guys got in a fist fight. So, look, I don't make a lot of this. I do think Trump is shrewd, and he's endorsing the people he thinks is going to win. Threw Mo Brooks over the side in Alabama because he thought Mo wasn't going to win, which is probably true. So, and then he's got the stink of the Supreme Court, which is now no longer seen as a particularly legitimate organization by the majority of Americans. That's a terrifying thing for the state of our democracy. So we're in big trouble, and I do ultimately have faith in American voters that they can tell when we're in big trouble, and we are in big trouble.
Well, to paraphrase you, Doctor, you say we're in big trouble and you don't have the answers. So not the most encouraging opening to the conversation, but
well, look,
brutally honest. I want to go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to, Ari, the answers are in the American voters. This is their choice of what kind of country they want to live in. There was a brilliant article this week about the Republicans essentially adapting the same tactics used by Viktor Orban to have Hungary depart from the state of democracy. That could happen here. It's up to the only people that can stop this are the American voters, and they're going to get a chance in about 5 months.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there. As for J.D. Vance, I mean, you could run ads in Ohio targeted with people who think Donald Trump is a North Star and just run the old stuff, not the new stuff, where J.D. Vance skewers him. I'm going to play a little bit of this for you. We have both so people can make up their own minds about him. But, gosh, you know, you could really just politically say this is what a never-Trumper he's been, and people can process that. And if you can't trust someone, then how do you want to give them more power? You mentioned the institution behind me where I'm reporting from. We've been covering this. We have more on the leaked draft opinion that would overturn Roe later in the program. As you say, if you can't trust justices when they say under oath, they say at the time Roe's decided it's a super precedent, and now we're reading a draft that says it's always been wrong. Well, with
tonight, what are the next things that are going to be attacked?
Siege in Mariupol. Russian forces breach the steel plant as Putin hopes to declare some kind of victory with a Z formation by next week. Dave Chappelle attacked by an armed man. Tonight, the 23-year-old charged with tackling the comedian. Eye on America, how music therapy is helping those struggling with addiction. Tonight's other top headlines, millions of Americans in the path of severe weather, the $141 million TurboTax settlement, plus new clues in the search for the missing Alabama inmate and corrections officer. And finally, our series, The Modern Mom, tonight with a woman who has helped raise hundreds of children.
This is the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell, reporting from the nation's capital.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Major Garrett. Norah is on assignment. Tonight, the cost of borrowing money is going up at the fastest pace in recent history. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates by 0.5 percentage point. It's the largest rate increase since 2000, when the
That nationwide manhunt for an escaped murder suspect and corrections officer seen on surveillance leaving the jail together. News coming in tonight on their getaway car. Also, the images coming in, workers trapped after the collapse of a former power plant in Boston. Rescuers.
We have calls for some sort of, Women's Health Protection Act or something along those lines in terms of language, but at the same time, obviously any sort of legislation that would be passed by Congress would still be subject to judicial review by the Supreme Court.
Hager says that any legislation passed by Congress to reinstate abortion rights should Roe v. Wade be overturned would likely be struck down, leaving the future of abortion regulations in states' hands. In Aberdeen, Sarah Parkin, Dakota News Now.
An election 2022 update tonight. South Dakota voters could be considering two separate ballot measures concerning Medicaid expansion this November. The group Dakotans for Health submitted roughly 23,000 signatures to the Secretary of State yesterday. The measure would require Medicaid be made available to people who live below 133% of the federal poverty line. The proposed constitutional amendment to expand Medicaid eligibility has already been certified for the November ballot.
Of weeks. The protests and demonstrations, crowds gathering at the Supreme Court again today. The leak only heightening concerns that the highest court in the land has become even more politicized. Chief Justice John Roberts, who called the leak an egregious breach, has now tapped the court's marshal, Colonel Gail Curley, to lead the investigation into the leak. And President Biden warning again today the landmark decision is about more than abortion, saying of former President Trump's movement, quote, MAGA is the most extreme political organization that's existed in recent American history. If the final ruling does overturn Roe, 26 states are ready to ban abortion, likely very quickly, including 13 states that have so-called trigger laws that ban it immediately. Tonight, we take you to those states ahead of any decision that could be coming from the court imposing new restrictions already. The women who have made very difficult decisions because of that, and the women who are cheering on those states. ABC's Rachel Scott leading us off tonight.
Across America, from San Francisco to Michigan, to Texas, to the steps of the Supreme Court, women on both sides of the abortion debate taking to the streets after the draft of a coming Supreme Court decision revealed Roe v. Wade is likely to be overturned. This after Republican legislators in a growing number of states already passed strict new laws, making it extremely difficult to get the procedure. In Oklahoma, the governor just signed a law banning abortion at 6 weeks, before many women even know they are pregnant. Before it went into effect, women were traveling to Oklahoma from other states with similar bans already in place. We met up with one of them.
I never thought that I would be one of the people desperate, driving across state lines for help in this situation.
Marie, who did not want us to show her face, came here after she was unable to get an abortion back home in Texas.
You're here today because you no longer want to continue with your pregnancy?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Marie had to wait weeks for an appointment to open up.
I think it was like 37 days. So, having to mentally fight that every day was really rough too.
Before its own strict law went into effect, Oklahoma's Planned Parenthood says they saw a nearly 2,500% increase in the number of women traveling here from Texas to end their pregnancies. Nicole, who lives here, could not find an available appointment and had to look elsewhere.
When did you first learn that you were pregnant? What was your reaction?
Very upset. Very upset.
very life-changing, very upset. I can barely make ends meet at the moment with my other 2 boys.
We were there once she crossed into Kansas.
I'm willing to do whatever's necessary because there's no way I can afford another baby. I can't.
Did you ever think that that would be the length that you would have to go through?
No, I never did. I had to take a vacation day. I had to make sure both my kids were taken care of. It was really hard.
But on the other side of this issue are women like Wendy Stearman, herself a mother of 6.
I very much agree with the founding principles of our country, which are to defend life and liberty, and life is the first one. And
she runs a homeschool cooperative for more than 400 kids, and she's a new member of the Oklahoma State Legislature.
The purpose in my position as a legislator, my goal is to make sure that the state of Oklahoma does outlaws abortion. As an individual citizen, my hope is that this will save the lives of babies.
Do you feel like the public support is behind you?
In the state of Oklahoma, absolutely.
And the states, she tells me, are the places where decisions should be made. She is eagerly awaiting a day when the Supreme Court overturns Roe versus Wade, and individual states, once again, have that power.
And Rachel Scott with us here in New York tonight. Always great to have you in person. And as we await this final Supreme Court ruling on Roe versus Wade in Washington, I know Democrats say they want to make a federal law to protect Roe v. Wade. They likely don't have the votes, which you reported last night here. But there is news late today from a Republican senator who said she would look at anything that's proposed.
Yes, David, and this would be a shift for Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski, because when this legislation came to the floor in the Senate earlier this year, she did not support it. She said that it was too broad. Now she does seem interested in trying to find a pathway forward to codify Roe versus Wade. She is one of 2 Republican senators that does support abortion rights. The other is Senator Susan Collins. And she says that she felt misled by Justices Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, that it would be completely inconsistent with what they said to her face. She said in 2018 that she was convinced that neither one of them would overturn Roe versus Wade. But even with the support of those 2 Republicans, Democrats still don't have the votes they need, David.
Right. Rachel Scott with us here tonight. And Rachel, we should mention that you'll have much more of your reporting later tonight right here on Nightline. Thank you, Rachel. In the meantime, we do have one more note on this tonight. President Biden again warning if the Supreme Court overturns Roe versus Wade, it could be just the beginning. The president warning of what Republicans and President Trump's MAGA movement, he says, could do next.
What happens if you have a state changes the law saying that children who are LGBTQ can't be in classrooms with other children? Is that legit under the way the decision is written? What are the next things that are going to be attacked? Because this MAGA crowd is really the most extreme political organization that's existed in American history, in recent American history.
And so the political warnings begin. He hinted at this yesterday, Terry, went back at it today and went even further. Let's go to Terry Moran at the court, who's covered the Supreme Court for years for us. And Terry, what did you make of what the White House is already signaling tonight?
Well, David, Justice Alito says that's not true. He says in his draft opinion that this ruling should abortion because of the profound issues it raises. But the problem is the way Justice Alito overrules Roe versus Wade that has President Biden and many legal scholars alarmed. Alito says that unless a right is specified in the Constitution or deeply rooted in our nation's history and traditions, it doesn't qualify as a constitutional right. And scholars say there are many things we think of as rights that weren't around when the Constitution was written, not in our history. There weren't a lot of gay marriages when the Constitution was written, or interracial marriages. Contraceptives were illegal. And they say that Alito's argument could cut those rights down no matter what he says if someone brings a challenge to them. And they note that the last time the Republican Party wrote a platform in 2016, it called for overruling Roe versus Wade and the case that legalized gay marriage.
All right, Terry Moran live at the Supreme Court, and we note the sound of the protesters on both sides of this behind you again tonight, Terry. Thank you. In the meantime, we do turn to the economy. The other major headline tonight, your credit cards, loans, and new mortgages. The Federal Reserve raising interest rates 0.5 point to try to slow down this economy and inflation. The largest interest rate hike since the year 2000, 22 years. Now, investors knew this was coming, and they were relieved the Fed doesn't plan to get even more aggressive with future hikes. The markets actually with their best day since May of 2020, the Dow closing up 932 points. That's nearly 3%. Obviously good news for your 401k, but credit cards, loans, mortgages, will now cost more. Here's our chief business and economics correspondent, Rebecca Jarvis, breaking it down tonight.
Tonight, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell announcing the largest interest rate hike in 22 years.
Inflation is much too high, and we understand the hardship it is causing, and we're moving expeditiously to bring it back down.
The Fed increasing rates 0.5 percentage point, sending the cost of borrowing on everything from your credit card to a new car or home loan higher. Mortgage rates already up. In just the last 5 months, the average 30-year fixed-rate mortgage has jumped from 3.4% to more than 5.4% today. In real terms, that means the mortgage payment on the median-priced home has jumped from about $1,500 a month to about $1,900 today, a $419 difference. The Fed hoping the moves will help cool demand and stabilize prices, but some now asking, did the Fed act too late to stave off a recession?
The Fed is now not just hitting the brakes, but in some ways driving in reverse, using the rearview mirror to see where we're going.
And David, while this means it will cost you more to borrow, it also means you'll be paid more to save your money in a bank or CD. The Federal Reserve expects to continue hiking interest rates throughout the year. David?
Rebecca Jarvis with us tonight. Thank you, Rebecca. Overseas tonight into the war in Ukraine. Russia tonight intensifying its attacks, its troops entering the last stronghold in Mariupol, that steel plant. In fact, tonight, video posted by pro-Russian separatists showing explosions at the plant, that those troops have now breached the outer perimeter there. Video circulating online showing a missile strike on a bridge in the central city of Dnipro, and in Kharkiv, the second largest city where Ukraine's troops are making gains, Russian rockets slamming into an amusement park, including a children's playground. But of course, the concern in Mariupol are the civilians and the fighters still inside that plant. Our senior foreign correspondent, Ian Pannell, in Ukraine again tonight.
Tonight, large explosions at the Azovstal steel plant, seen in undated video posted by pro-Russian separatists. Putin's troops breaking through today into the Mariupol factory, where Ukrainian fighters in the city are making a last stand. Up to 200 civilians are still believed to be trapped underground there. And in Avdiivka, an explosion near a bus stop killing at least 10 people, seen in video posted by Ukrainian officials. But in the northeast, Russia's invasion is starting to look more like a retreat. These gruesome images show dead Russian soldiers lying in the open as Ukrainian troops retake territory. Some bodies even arranged in the Z pattern that Russia uses as an insignia for its war. The Kremlin now increasingly resorting to missile and rocket attacks, the targets often indiscriminate. We were in Kharkiv when this happened yesterday, an amusement park in the city hit by at least 2 Russian rockets.
We're at the scene of one of the bombings inside Kharkiv. This is Gorky Park. This was a children's playground. You can see the Ferris wheel over there. There was a beer garden, a photo booth, even a child's playground. Luckily, there was no one playing there at the time, but it just tells you everything you need to know about whether or not the Russians are actually targeting anything or not. These are civilian sites that are being repeatedly hit across this city.
In response to Russia's brutality, the European Union tightening sanctions and proposing a total ban on Russian oil by the end of the year. If it passes, it could be a serious blow to Russia's economy and its war machine.
David, those battles raging in Mariupol. We spoke to someone from the far-right Azov battalion who's at the steel plant. What he says now is that surrender is not an option. So unless the Russians give them safe passage to leave the complex, which is highly unlikely, then they're going to have no choice but to stand and fight to the death. David?
Just incredible, the world watching now with civilians inside that plant. Ian, thank you. Back here at home tonight into the investigation into that attack on comedian Dave Chappelle during a performance at the Hollywood Bowl. A man jumping on stage and then going after Chappelle. The suspect was armed with what's called a replica gun with a knife blade inside. What we've learned tonight about the suspect, and here's ABC's Kaylee Hartung.
Tonight, the man seen here tackling Dave Chappelle at the Hollywood Bowl venue in Los Angeles is in custody. 23-year-old Isaiah Lee is being held on suspicion of assault with a deadly weapon. Authorities say he was carrying this replica handgun with a knife blade.
Ladies and gentlemen.
TMZ video shows the assailant climbing on stage and attacking Chappelle in the middle of his set.
Subject's wearing a black hat, blue flannel, gray pants.
Lee then continues to run behind a screen where he was swarmed by the venue's security. Chappelle telling the crowd that the suspect was being stomped. The attacker was later taken to the hospital with injuries. Moments later, Chris Rock, who also performed at the Netflix Is a Joke the festival, joining Chappelle.
Was that Will Smith?
Rock referencing the infamous slap that occurred at the Oscars. Also among the star-studded crowd, Jamie Foxx, who rushed to help security. TMZ video showing Foxx and Chappelle on stage together to close the show.
Whenever you're in trouble, Jamie Foxx will show up in a sheriff's hat.
Tonight, Chappelle's rep releasing a statement saying, as unfortunate and unsettling as the incident was, Chappelle went on with the show, adding Chappelle is fully cooperating with the active police investigation into this incident.
And David, it's unclear how Lee got that knife inside the Hollywood Bowl. His bail's been set at $30,000, and the district attorney here in LA will decide in the next few days what charges he'll face. David?
Kaylee Hartung tonight. Kaylee, thank you. Now to the nationwide manhunt for that murder suspect and a corrections officer in Al.
We all need a
rain. Now further off to the south, we have an area of low pressure, though it's much stronger. It's bringing severe weather off to portions of Texas, Oklahoma, and into Kansas, but we're going to be avoiding that threat as well, and really kind of limiting our severe weather threat over the next couple of days. Temperatures, because of the clouds, were mainly in the 50s. Some of us were right around 60, like in Mobridge earlier, where the clouds did temporarily break up, and we're going to be mainly under those clouds for all of us overnight. Wind is coming in from the south and east, not that strong. It's only averaging between 10 and 15 miles an hour. But because of those clouds lingering, it's going to mean a bit of a mild start to our Thursday morning. Starting out the day in the 40s, 50s are back tomorrow. And because those clouds are going to be slowly clearing out in western South Dakota, we'll get back to the 60s in places like Pierre and even further off to the west. Friday gets warmer because we're going to be looking at sunshine virtually the entire day. So 70s will be back in western South Dakota, not quite that way further off to the east, but we'll still get back into the 60s. Now the wind is going to be staying very light tonight, and it's really not that bad right now. And it's going to remain light for the day tomorrow, even heading into Friday. The wind.
President Trump won in a walk. A lot of us thought it was going to be a lot closer than it actually was. It sets up a match with Tim Ryan. He won the Democratic nomination, the Youngstown area Democrat. He represents Youngstown here in this big building behind me, the U.S. Capitol. They're set to face off in November. It's going to be a race that tells us a lot about who's going to ultimately control the United States Senate. And joining me right now, somebody who's keeping a close eye on this race, Julia Manchester, national political reporter from The Hill. Julia, you wrote 5 takeaways from this race. And I just want to point out one thing when we talk about Trump's influence. Look at the races, the candidates, the Republican candidates who weren't endorsed by President Trump, but still sort of kissed the Trump ring. They were talking about Donald Trump, adhering to Donald Trump's principles. They were sort of Trump acolytes, I keep calling them. From J.D. Vance, 32%, Josh Mandel, 24%, all the way down to Jane Timken at 6%. A combined 73% of the Republican electorate in Ohio voted for Trump candidates or candidates that were aligned with Donald Trump. The only one that wasn't, we thought he was going to come make a late charge. It didn't happen. Matt Dolan, 24%. So it's undeniable. Trump was a major reason why J.D. Vance, former President Trump, got over the finish line well ahead of the competition.
Yeah, it's undeniable, but also I think Trump really drove turnout on the Republican side. I mean, if you look at the turnout between the Democratic side and the Republican side, I mean, it's almost no comparison. Republicans just turned out en masse in Ohio, and that's obviously a good sign if you're maybe Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, for example, or Katie Britt in Alabama. Yes, of course. But at the same time, I want to talk about Matt Dolan for a second. You know, he is someone who had been trailing in the polls for a while. He's been critical of President Trump, especially his claims of election fraud, but he did very well.
Came in third place.
Yeah, winning the suburbs of Cleveland itself. He's from the Cleveland area, so it makes sense. Columbus, parts of Columbus at least, of course, with that third C, Cincinnati, Vance won.
I want to get to that because I think that the divisions, one of your takeaways, divisions within the Republican Party also revealed by this race and going forward What are the implications for Pennsylvania and for Georgia?
You know, when we look at these areas, these suburban areas outside of, let's say, a Columbus or a Cleveland, we saw that Matt Dolan, someone who doesn't like Donald Trump, who didn't align himself with Donald Trump, he did very, very well. And I think that should spell trouble for some of these other Trump-aligned candidates like Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, maybe suburban Philadelphia, suburban Pittsburgh. It could show that there is still some suburban discontent with the former president.
You saw
to heal and rebuild the middle class and beat China. And I want to be the face and the voice of this campaign. And I don't want any distractions. I don't need anybody to prop me up like J.D. Vance did.
Even from the sitting president of the United States of your party, right?
I'm sorry?
Even from the sitting president of the United States of your party, who you voted with 100% of the time.
We'll make that decision as the campaign continues. But some of those votes are to bring a huge multi-billion-dollar Intel project to Ohio, creating thousands of jobs at $135,000 a year, or the bipartisan infrastructure bill that's going to create 600,000 jobs in the state of Ohio, or other initiatives that are going to get lead out of our pipes so our kids can drink clean water, $1 billion that we're going to put into the Great Lakes Restoration Project. So those things I voted for are for Ohio, and I don't have any billionaire like Peter Thiel pulling my strings or writing me a $10 million check. I'm here for Ohio. 97% of my donations are under $100. And that's who's powering my campaign. And nobody's going to own me. I'm going to vote. As I told you, I got in fights with Nancy Pelosi and ran against her, and Bernie Sanders and Barack Obama, and agreed with Trump. And I'm down the middle. I play it straight, and I'm for Ohio. And that's
covered
what
all
this
of
campaign's
those.
going to all be about.
We've covered all of those, and we appreciate you coming on and answering questions. We'll be out in Ohio to cover that race. Thank you, Congressman.
Just bring the orange tie with you.
You got it. You got it. Thank you. J.D. Vance, by the way, will be on Tucker Carlson tonight, and we will hear his reaction to the primary as well. Up next, the panel returns. More reaction.
February will push back to his written plan. But I want you to understand tonight, before we go, that he writes in the plan that once Roe is ended, all abortion rules and bans should get a green light from the courts. They should be cleared under the lowest standard. They should be passed, he says, just on a rational basis. That's the lowest standard there is. Why such a low standard? I'll tell you. In this draft opinion, Alito quotes a case that mentions the goal of preventing abortion and states it's not automatically sexist in his view. He refers to, quote, invidious animus against women and says these rules don't have that. And he says because of that, going forward, courts should okay abortion laws by that low standard that I'm telling you about. So Alito overturns precedent after claiming to respect it. He says this entire opinion is neutral on the issue of abortion, when, come on, everyone can see it's not. And then he claims this is not about power and gender at all, when, as I just showed you, it is. Justice Alito's claims, as written, are not true. So for all the talk in Washington about a leak endangering this Supreme Court, it's not just the leak. It's actually the substance, the sweeping actions in the draft itself that could ultimately undermine the integrity and honesty of this Supreme Court far more gravely, while perpetuating a clash over gender, power, and human rights that could be with us, well, as long as some in power insist on restricting other people's liberties in ways they would never do when governing themselves. We'll be right back with one more thing.
Car broke down. Now you're very...
Madison, Watertown.
Great news. When we come back here tonight, she tried to bow out, but they have honored her anyway. The incredible new list for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame tonight.
With less moderate to severe eczema, why?
The investments that we've made have enabled small retailers.
Tremfya is the first medication of its kind, also approved for adults.
I am one who suffers from chronic sinus infection.
You need to clean that crap out of your nose.
More than 25.
Wow.
And I didn't forget, Granny. I could never, never forget you.
How could they? How could anyone? Mark Strassman, CBS News, Oceanport, New Jersey.
Let it flow, and we'll be right back.
When it comes to real estate agents,
$1 billion in auto repair. Should you?
Ready to shine from the inside out?
At night.
Wow, I get it.
Read or watch TV. QB.
Missouri River Valley, Yankton, Vermilion areas. Highs tomorrow, the upper 50s to the low 60s, sunny mid 60s to the west. And then on Friday, now we're talking partly cloudy skies, east breeze, mid 60s in eastern KELO, showers in the mid 70s in the west, ahead of a weekend that's going to be full of 70s across KELO land. This is KELO Weather Now.
To lower A1C. Most people who took Ozempic reached an A1C under 7 and stomach pain, changes in vision, or diabetic retinopathy. Serious side effects may include
I've been playing ball for about 65 years.
I've been everywhere. I've been to Pittsburgh, Parkersburg, Gravelburg, Colorado, Ellen City, Cedar City, Dodge City, what a pity. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere.
Better hearing leads to a better life, and that better life starts
if you get a lump or swelling in your neck, severe stomach pain, or an allergic reaction. Serious side effects may include pancreatitis.
Seasons come and go, but not at Beatty Forsyth. They've been here 24/7 for over 75
and kidney problems.
Looking to get back in your type 2 diabetes zone? Ask your healthcare provider today about once-weekly Ozempic.
You may pay as little as $25 for a 3-month
cyber device to rescue the bats. No, bats! Ah, what is
your full
tonight about the show.
Everybody's jaw dropped. No one believed he was responsible.
I did not kill Devin.
I've never forgotten my interview with Anthony.
Why have you decided to talk about this?
There's still an unsolved murder here.
2020, Friday night on ABC.
Finally, Hall of Famer Dolly Parton. Tonight, she's in. Dolly Parton inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. After her early plea to respectfully bow out of contention, fearing she hadn't made a rock and roll album, saying she didn't feel she'd earned the right. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame then saying she would stay on the list, saying the honor is not defined by any one genre. Tonight, Dolly Parton joining fellow inductees Eminem, Lionel Richie, Carly Simon, Eurythmics, Duran Duran, and Pat Benatar. And tonight, Dolly Parton saying, I am honored and humbled. I will accept it gracefully.
I will always, always love you. I will always love you.
We salute Dolly and the inductees.
Your mornings are busy and hectic. It seems every day is different. You never know when news can change your family's plans or affect their safety. Dakota News Now brings you reliability in an unpredictable world. Alexandra and Eric start your morning with the latest stories and breaking news that happened overnight. And First Alert meteorologist Aaron Doudna will help you plan and prepare for your busy day. Dakota News Now, keeping your family safe and making your day a little easier. Every weekday from 5 to 7.
A severe thunderstorm watch remains in effect until
strong winds in excess of 60 miles an hour. The tornado warning that's going to be going into effect.
With over 50 years of experience, the Dakota News Now First Alert weather team gives you the most accurate forecast when you want it.
When news breaks, you need it now. Stream Dakota News Now on your favorite platform and stay connected to what's happening now, right here in South Dakota. Dakota News Now. News when you want it.
Catch Dakota News Now at 9 on Fox Sioux Falls. It's news when you want it.
Tonight, several developing stories, a grim new COVID milestone, and the growing fallout over that Supreme Court leak. First, the protests nationwide over that leaked Supreme Court draft that would overturn Roe versus Wade abortion protections. President Biden claiming the GOP may target other longstanding rights next, and calling Donald Trump supporters, quote, the most extreme political organization in recent American history. How Republicans are reacting as Democrats look to make abortion a central issue in the midterms. Also tonight, a dire new number in the pandemic. COVID deaths in the U.S. now surpassing 1 million, with cases rising again. The Fed announcing the biggest rate hike in more than 22 years as it seeks to tame soaring inflation. The impact on everything from mortgages to credit cards to car loans. In Ukraine, heavy fighting at the Mariupol steel plant where hundreds of civilians remain trapped. And the new evidence, the death toll in the single worst attack on civilians so far may be double initial reports, some 600 killed. Tracking severe storms on the move tonight. And Dave Chappelle attacked on stage, the suspect taken down and arrested. The unusual weapon police say he had.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening. Just breaking as we come on the air tonight, a stunning milestone reached in this country's battle with COVID. According to an NBC News count, the number of dead who had the virus in the U.S. has just crossed the 1 million mark. We'll get to that in a few moments. But we begin here tonight with a scramble over the future of abortion rights after that leaked draft Supreme Court decision that appeared to show the handwriting on the wall. A court inclined to rule there's no constitutional right to abortion, sending the decision to the states. Democrats left with no way to stop the train, now looking to make Republican opponents of abortion pay a political price as the midterm election campaigns heat up. President Biden setting the Democrats' tone, warning abortion could be the first of many rights stripped away by the court. Emotions running high on both sides, with the outcome deeply personal and consequential for so many. Peter Alexander has late details.
Tonight, with protests growing,
good afternoon.
President Biden that leaked draft opinion that would overturn Roe v. Wade could lead to the unraveling of other privacy rights, from contraception to gay marriage.
This is about a lot more than abortion.
The president using the draft opinion to slam former President Trump's allies.
What are the next things that are going to be attacked? Because this MAGA crowd is really the most extreme political organization that's existed in American history, in recent American history.
Although the draft is not the court's final decision, Vice President Harris blasted Republican leaders during an event last night.
How dare they tell a woman what she can do and cannot do with her own body? How dare they?
Still, Democrats do not have many options without the Senate votes to pass a law that would guarantee abortion rights nationwide. Instead, Democrats are looking to amplify the abortion issue heading into the midterms to target Republicans.
This November is going to be a referendum on privacy and your rights to freedom as an American. They don't want to make that the case. They want it to be, oh, it's inflation, it's something at the border. No, it's something more basic than that.
Overturning Roe would not outlaw abortion, but would leave it up to state legislatures to decide whether there should be restrictions. Currently, 13 states have so-called trigger laws that would ban abortion if Roe is overturned, with exceptions for the health of the mother. Republicans tonight insist there's a reason Democrats are focusing on the leaked opinion.
They want to change the topic from immigration, from the soaring inflation. They want to get off of the things that are so unpopular about this president.
And Peter, even without the vote, Senate Democrats are moving forward next week. What's the thinking there?
Yeah, that's right, Lester. Democrats have taken the first steps toward a vote to guarantee abortion rights that's all but certain to fail, but they say they still want to get every senator on the record. Lester.
Peter Alexander at the White House. Thank you. Some of the states that have those abortion trigger laws we just talked about are preparing for what might be inevitable. Blaine Alexander tonight on how the leaked Supreme Court draft decision is playing out in those states and beyond.
In North Dakota, women have one place to go for abortion services, Red River Women's Clinic in Fargo.
It is a very rural state, so we serve a lot of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in our center, and those are the people that would disproportionately be harmed by this ban.
That ban, not final, but after the bombshell leak of the Supreme Court draft opinion, providers like Tammy Kromenacher are preparing. She's posted on the clinic's website, letting clients know their appointments are still good. But, she says, if Roe is overturned,
it means lights out in North Dakota.
That's because the procedure would immediately be outlawed. North Dakota is one of 13 states with a trigger law. We will not go back! Across the country, it's what abortion rights advocates fear the most.
Pro-life is pro-woman!
And what anti-abortion groups are hoping for.
For almost 50 years, we've been working for this point.
Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony List, says in recent months she's talked to governors in about 20 states. Her message, make sure your state is ready to go.
Those conversations now are, far less conditional seeming because it looks like we may have an opportunity to build consensus and pass laws to save lives all over the country.
In Louisiana, abortion is currently legal up to 20 weeks. But if Roe were to end, Louisiana's 3 clinics would immediately shut down.
What would you say to women who are still desperate for that procedure and would still seek it out?
I would say that there are resources available to you, that we want to help you here in Louisiana. The pro-life movement is very supportive of women.
This week, Louisiana state legislature advanced a bill that would make it more difficult to challenge the state's trigger law. State Senator Cleo Field was one of just 3 lawmakers to vote against it.
Is this an insurmountable hill that you're trying to climb here?
Maybe so, but at the end of the day, you got to fight for what you feel is right. I just don't feel that a majority male legislature should be telling women what to do with their bodies.
And some states are working on the other side as well to strengthen laws that would protect abortion rights should Roe be overturned. Lester?
Okay, Blaine, thank you. Let's turn now to our other top story, COVID's horrific toll. Our team here at NBC News has been compiling data daily from states across the country. And late today, we learned that more than 1 million Americans have now died from the disease, a milestone we didn't want to think about, but knew was coming. In a pandemic that's far from over. Here's Gabe Gutierrez.
It was once unthinkable. Tonight, it's reality. 1 million people in the U.S. have now died from COVID-19, according to the ongoing NBC News count.
I just miss everything about her. Everything.
Lisa Wilson of Palm Beach County, Florida, lost her grandmother, Lily Mae, to the virus last year.
It was so terrifying. My aunt called me and she said something is wrong with her. She was laid across the bed and she was like gasping for air.
Lisa would say goodbye not just to her grandmother, but to her uncle.
So funny.
And 4 cousins within weeks. In all, 6 relatives claimed by COVID.
It was very, very hard.
Back in March of 2020, as streets were deserted and morgue trucks first appeared outside hospitals, for many Americans, the idea of 1 million COVID deaths seemed far-fetched.
We could get in the range of 100,000 to 200,000 fatalities.
Dr. Angela Chen of Mount Sinai Hospital diagnosed the first confirmed COVID case in New York, even before the World Health Organization declared the. When you first made that diagnosis, did you have any idea what this pandemic would become?
I don't think any of us did.
We spoke with her today in Central Park at the former site of a makeshift field hospital.
It's really been something that I think has fundamentally changed who I am and how I think about medicine, how I think about my patients.
So many families tonight, including Lisa Wilson and her husband, are reflecting on the lives lost and lessons learned.
All of my family members that was deceased from COVID, they were not vaccinated. So vaccines save lives.
Even 7 figures can't measure the grief.
We love you.
Gabe Gutierrez, NBC News, New York.
And I'll share some thoughts and perspective on this solemn milestone in just a few minutes. But right now, let's turn to the fight against inflation. The Fed raising interest rates by 0.5 percentage point, the most in more than 2 decades, meaning just about everything we buy on credit will get more expensive. Jolene Kent has that story.
With inflation skyrocketing, Willie Price tells us she's praying prices will come down soon.
Everything is high. Everything is almost unaffordable. Food is high. The gas is high. The electric bills went up.
Like the majority of Americans.
Amount of success on the battlefield over the last 2.5 months. The United States has been giving Ukraine security assistance before the war started to strengthen their defensive posture, and we have been surging assistance to them literally every single day since the war began. As the war has evolved on the ground, as Ukraine's security assistance needs have evolved on the ground, we have adjusted the types of equipment and ammunition and support that we are giving to them. And I think you're seeing the results of this, given the success that the Ukrainians have been able to have in terms of defending their country against Russia's assault. This was seen, of course, most notably in Kyiv, where we saw the Russians pull back from their approach quite significantly, and they have prevented the Russians from achieving their primary objective of dominating the entire country.
So obviously it's important that the weapons, you know, as the U.S. sees it, have been significant. But the Russian Defense Minister, Sergei Shoigu, today said that Moscow now considers equipment coming in from NATO, anybody else, the U.S., as a legitimate target. So if it comes into Ukraine anyway, they say it's legitimate to strike it. Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby said today Russian forces are attempting to hit critical infrastructure targets out towards the west, where all that aid is coming in. You know, that is how they come in, and we've seen these strikes on rail lines as well. Now they're saying vehicles and convoys are legitimate targets. Do you have any idea how many American weapons have been lost already in these strikes?
I don't have an assessment of that. We have continued to provide Ukraine with the security assistance that they've requested. We have continued to work with our allies and partners, and as this conflict continues to evolve in the weeks ahead, we're going to continue ensuring that we are getting the Ukraine the equipment and the ammunition that they need to be able to continue fighting on the battlefield.
All right, Amanda Sloat, thank you very much. I very much appreciate your time. As I said, Senior Director for Europe on the White House National Security Council. And next, we're going to return to a small village just outside Kyiv to hear from the Ukrainian soldiers who pushed back Putin's forces and saved the capital.
Here in these woods in this town, it was infantry versus infantry, close proximity fighting.
Plus new audio tonight of Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy discussing the removal of Trump from office in the days after the insurrection.
What the president did is atrocious and totally wrong.
And images just released of the weapon a man used to attack comedian Dave Chappelle while he was on stage.
Aaron. Recognized name in consignment for good reason.
When we first met her at a shelter in Dnipro, she told us, I just pray he's alive and he'll make it out. She hasn't heard from him in 5 days. Mariupol's mayor today.
How many people, how many civilians are still there?
The Russians are still storming the plant, even though they said they wouldn't, the mayor said, telling me more than 200 civilians are still inside, including at least 20 children. But tonight, firepower from the U.S. is reaching the battlefield. A senior U.S. defense official says 90% of the howitzers promised to Ukraine are now in the country.
Tonight, that senior U.S. defense official says most of the Russian forces in and around Mariupol have now moved north, likely to join the fight in Donbass, and only about 2,000 are still in the city. Lester?
Kelly Kobiea, thank you. Here at home, we're tracking yet more severe weather tonight in the middle of the country and parts of the south. Bill Cairns is watching it all. Bill, what's the latest?
Good evening, Lester. It's a dangerous evening and in many cases going to be a sleepless night as these storms will explode in the next couple hours and travel through Oklahoma and Texas. We have tornado watches that are up already for numerous locations in Oklahoma and Texas. And this area of red, north of Dallas, right along the Red River, all the way from Wichita Falls to Oklahoma City, that's the areas of greatest concern for not just tornadoes, but strong tornadoes this evening and baseball-sized hail falling from the sky. That's 3 inches in diameter. And then tomorrow we track all this severe weather into areas of Arkansas, Little Rock, you're at risk, Memphis, all the way down to Shreveport. And if this wasn't enough, we also are going to see these storms dumping a ton of rain, and we have a flash flood threat tonight through Oklahoma.
Bill, thanks for keeping an eye on it. In 60 seconds, the attack on comedian Dave Chappelle as he was on stage, the charges the suspect faces. And Donald Trump Jr. testifies before the committee investigating the January 6th attack.
On a day without migraine, my whole body feels free. Because my eyes don't shy from the light, my head doesn't pound, and my stomach isn't nauseous.
It's time for migraine prevention delivered differently through an IV infusion. It's time for Vyepti, a preventive treatment for migraine in adults. Vyepti is designed to start working fast and to last.
Together as a community, make a difference in someone's day.
Time to prepare our defenders of Mariupol.
Far from the front, in France today, the European Union announced new penalties on Russian banks and a full ban on Russian oil. There may be temporary exemptions for Hungary and Slovakia, but European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the move was necessary.
And let's be clear, it will not be easy, because some member states are strongly dependent on Russian oil, but we simply have to do it.
But the bloc remains divided over an even larger punishment, a ban on Russian natural gas, mostly because of German resistance. But economic punishment has not prevented Russia from waging war. Today in Moscow, Russian jets flew in a Z formation, a symbol of the conflict. The country is preparing for Monday's national holiday, celebrating the anniversary of victory in World War II.
British and American officials fear that Vladimir Putin could use his anticipated speech on Monday, May the 9th, to declare some kind of victory or escalate a war, Jeff, that has already destroyed so much and taken so many lives.
So, Nick, what kind of victory could Putin declare, and what exactly are his options for escalation?
Yeah, you heard Mariupol's mayor admit earlier today that he lost contact temporarily with the soldiers and civilians, the last holdouts in Mariupol steel plant. And if Russia takes over that plant and therefore takes over Mariupol, Putin could declare that Russia has created a land bridge from Russia to Crimea by combining territory that separatists in Donetsk and Luhansk and the Donbass already controlled since 2014 with new territory that Russia currently occupies in southern and southeastern Ukraine. And on escalation, a senior U.S. official acknowledges to me that Russia does have options for escalation. The U.S. remains concerned about chemical and biological attacks, and British officials are publicly saying that Putin will use his speech on Monday to declare some kind of national conscription in which he would increase the invasion of Ukraine and could even try and target Kyiv once again. Now, many experts and Western officials I talked to say that's unlikely because it could spark the kind of dissent inside Russia that Putin so far has suppressed. But they do admit, Jeff, that that kind of announcement is possible.
Is there any sign that the strikes that Russia says target Western weapons, is there any sign that that's preventing their delivery?
U.S. and Western officials I talked to say there is no sign that Russia has managed to interdict those weapons convoys. A senior U.S. defense official tells me that either Russia doesn't have the intelligence to target those convoys or the capacity in terms of precision-guided munitions in order to actually interdict some of those convoys. And Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said yesterday that most of those howitzers, that artillery that are coming from the U.S. into Ukraine, have actually reached eastern Ukraine, and Ukrainian soldiers are now using them against Russia in the fight in the Donbass. But the increased weaponry has led to some officials in Moscow say that this is a kind of proxy war between the U.S. and Russia. And, Jeff, that goes back to the fears of escalation, because Russian officials have indicated that they would rather escalate than lose a proxy battle.
And lastly, Nick, you are standing in a street that's at the center of Kyiv, as I understand it. Give us a sense of what life is like there now.
Yeah, this is the center of Kyiv. This would normally be a bustling street. There is a curfew at 10 p.m. in Kyiv, and even though it's been 5 weeks since Russian forces left the area around Kyiv, this city is a ghost town after 10 o'clock, and I am standing pretty much in the middle of the street. That said, during the day, a lot of residents have returned to Kyiv over the last 5 weeks, and there are a lot of shops and life open. But, Jeff, tonight, as you can see, this is still a city at war.
Absolutely. Nick Schifrin for us tonight in Kyiv. Nick, thanks for that reporting. And just beyond Ukraine's front lines, there is another fight to keep those injured on the battlefield alive. Resources are low, but the volunteers who run a vast network of emergency medical services remain committed to their life-saving work. Special correspondent Willem Marks and videographer Edward Kiernan spent time with some of these medics and filmed for the first time the extraordinary treatment given to wounded Ukrainian soldiers in the field. They also saw firsthand the difficulties that ordinary Ukrainians are having in accessing care in the midst of war. And a warning, some of these images in this story are disturbing.
In a country at war, guardian angels appear in many guises. In this corridor, sorting through a mess of medical donations. This is Kiev HQ for the Hospitalers, a volunteer group of several hundred trained combat medics. These men and women getting briefed are not all Ukrainian, but they are all heading east to help treat Ukraine's wounded on its front lines with Russia. Yana Zinkovich is the movement's founder and a member of Ukraine's parliament.
More and more people are coming. Today we will be forming a new team, and it will be the 47th.
Her group tries to fill the gaps in a medical system under massive strain.
You need to understand that when there are major military activities in different places at the same time, there's a limited quantity of military doctors, a limited quantity of medical vehicles, and a limited quantity of other military specialists.
In this makeshift stockroom, final packing preparations are underway. In the shadow of a cathedral to the soundtrack of a choir, these waiting ambulances will be stocked and shipped out. Days later, and 8 hours east in the town of Pavlograd, we catch up with some Hospitalers. Each team assigned to serve at frontline postings, not all of them proficient in firearms safety. Ihor is headed to a village on the border between Donetsk and Luhansk, 2 hours further east. Authorities asked us not to identify the location. There, a local walk-in clinic is now a military hospital with extra ER space stationed outside, all of it empty when we arrive.
Just to give you an example of how healthcare is being delivered in this country during this conflict, this is a mobile field hospital that's been parked inside a very small, very quiet Ukrainian village, about 15 minutes drive from frontline fighting, and 2 civilian oncologist surgeons are waiting here every day for dozens of patients to be brought in.
Cancer specialist Miroslav Dombrovich told us he'd been here 2 weeks and had helped stabilize many severely injured soldiers.
We see bullet injuries to the brain, bullet injuries to the chest, abdomen, extremities.
As we talk, a radio announces an emergency arrival.
I go to help our soldiers.
Okay, thanks.
So, thank you.
A Hospitaler team unloads 18-year-old Vasil, a volunteer soldier struck by shelling at a nearby checkpoint. He's badly hurt. Inside the trauma room, Miroslav struggles with colleagues to save his life. They've lost 2 patients already today. Shrapnel has pierced Vasil's skull. They staunch the bleeding, intubate, check his back, examine the wound. Vasil's cell phone starts to ring. Repeatedly. It's taken outside with his other belongings. His head is wrapped. A doctor requests transport to a better equipped hospital. Then they wait. The long delay worries these civilian doctors.
The wound is severe, the prognosis is serious, but it helps that the brainstem is not damaged and is working. Blood flow and saturation are within the acceptable limits.
With the ambulance en route, doctors start treating Slava, who asked us not to film his face. He reached the same post as Vasil the night before, was caught in the same shell blast, but has escaped with much lighter injuries. An ambulance finally arrives for the long journey to Dnipro's Mechnikov Hospital, where Vasil still remains alive, but in a coma. Staff there treat soldiers and civilians alike, the vast majority victims of Russian missiles. Strikes on a train station in Kramatorsk on April 8th shocked the world. For 46-year-old railway worker Yevgeny, they shattered his life.
Suddenly we heard the explosions, cluster ones, 1, 2, 3. I'm not sure if I jumped or not. Maybe I figured it out late. I don't know. But when I fell and was lying down, I heard an explosion again. I turned my head. My hand was in an unnatural position. My knees bleeding like hell, and people are running around.
Within 2 hours, he was on the operating table.
I consider myself lucky. My actual birthday is April 17th, so April 8th is now my second birthday.
Natalia Budyak is responsible for East Ukraine's heavily stressed healthcare system, as hospitals like this try to cope with the conflict's many victims.
The system has been reconfigured to provide patients with the care they need as quickly as possible. So everyone tries to bring patients as soon as possible to the nearest hospital that can provide care.
Ukraine recently created a nationwide health service, the only one to operate meaningfully in a country mired in conflict.
These are things that have never coexisted in the world. So this is the first time we've encountered this. Were we ready for this? You can't be ready for war.
Russian bombs damage Ukrainians' bodies, but also destroy Ukrainian buildings, pharmacies included. In the heavily shelled city of Chernihiv, northeast of Kyiv, Anatoly Grabovets hunts for his elderly mother's pain medication.
There were no timely deliveries of the medicine, and when it all started, the pharmaceutical warehouse was bombed.
At those stores still standing, 66-year-old Leonid Kuzmin cannot get the drugs he needs.
There are shortages of the medicines in there. Supplies are not regular.
British paramedic Richard Whitmarsh is well versed in emergencies, but he's never seen desperation like this.
It's going to be a crisis if things don't change quite soon, because we've got all these chronic illness that, needs that are not being met. Did you take it every day, or?
He's come here as a volunteer to help however he can.
What have we got?
Dispensing a limited supply of pills, but plenty of professional advice.
So if she used to cut these in half and take one a day.
To an endless line of locals.
There seems to be a breakdown somewhere. I think the main focus is on the security, the army, the war, and fighting the Russians, which is understandable. But there does seem to be a misalignment here in the community, as you can see from the crowd to my left now. Give half a teaspoon.
The catastrophic consequences of this conflict felt not just on the battlefield. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Willem Marks in Chernihiv, Ukraine.
And a note, our coverage of Ukraine is supported in partnership with the Pulitzer Center. A busy month of primary elections kicked.
Out Jefferson Davis, George Wallace. There have been a few more that the hyperbole doesn't really hold for, haven't there?
Oh, I would definitely say Jefferson Davis is more extreme than the MAGA crowd, but they are definitely the most extreme we've had in his lifetime. And I think it's time for us to put some things in perspective. This decision is ridiculous. It's going to attack other rights. I don't believe you could have liberty without privacy. And Roe v. Wade expands the right of privacy. It actually enumerates the right of privacy.
Right, I guess, Chris, what I'm trying...
I know the topic we're talking about, though, is extreme rhetoric. And unfortunately, Leland, that's the world we live in. If I send out a tweet right now saying how great it is to see Tony Katz again, nobody's going to care. But if I send out a tweet attacking Tony Katz, it'll get 25,000 likes. Not from anybody I like, Tony, just for the record.
Okay, well, hey, it would get a like from me, and I like both of you, so we can all get along. I'm thinking, Tony, though, about the maps that we put up, because America, if you poll it, there is a window that a large percentage of Americans support of the decision of abortion remains between a woman and her doctor up until a very early part of the pregnancy. whether it's a constitutional amendment or not, on and on and on, or a constitutional right or different issues, but they support that idea. But somehow no one can codify that in law. Is that because it is in the best interest of the politicians to actually keep us all fighting and divided over issues like this and fundraise over it, rather than try to solve the problem?
Well, so it's an interesting take, because I think there are some things worth fighting over and some things worth discussing over. It's just a question of how. The people in Los Angeles who want to attack cops, of course, they're wrong. The people who want to get violent about these things, a decision from the Supreme Court. I was disgusted by the decision of John Roberts to allow Obamacare to come into existence, all of a sudden deciding it was a tax, doing the job that the Obama administration simply could not do for itself. The court does indeed make these decisions. The divisions between us are sometimes actual, real, serious issues about how we see the world and how we see America. And the decision, and we don't have the final decision from Justice Alito or from the Supreme Court yet. Things can certainly change. It's okay to repeal. It's okay to rescind. It's okay to overturn precedent from the court.
Right. Back now to the topic at hand, which was the media. Chris Hahn, how much of a incentive in Washington, which is where you used to work for the great Chuck Schumer, the current majority leader, how much of it is there an incentive to actually get things done and compromise versus an incentive to rile people up, to create the more division, and thus to fundraise off people being angry?
The reward is all on the rile people upside now, and that is the problem in America. That is a direct result of gerrymandered districts, which make primaries more important than general elections. It is the doom of our country. It's less so in the Senate than it is in the House, but it is still there in the Senate, because there are some states that will never be red and some states that will never be blue. And there is an incentive to rile people up. Some new members of the House of Representatives decided that they weren't going to have legislative directors. They were going to put all of their money into their communications team, because that's where the action has been for them, and that's where the reward has been. And unfortunately, Leland, they're not coming on shows like this where there's a back and forth. They're going to siloed shows like Tucker Carlson, who no longer has progressive guests on to fight back. It's all an echo chamber, feeding a beast and a money-making machine. It's horrible.
Tucker almost sounds reasonable when you think about Steve Bannon and some of the shows that J.D. Vance ended up on in Ohio. Tony, to you, this is Greg Gutfeld with an old friend of mine, Jessica Tarlov. Take a listen.
I think the assumption that that the poor, helping the poor by giving them more abortions seems pretty gross to me.
It's giving them options.
Yes, of course. That's what we call it.
Again, if you can't even have a discussion without making fun of the other side, how do you in any way expect to solve the problem?
I'm a little bit lost in where you're coming from, because that does not sound to me like the end of civilization. No one's screaming, no one's yelling. It is clearly dismissive from Greg, but it's okay to be like, yeah, I don't think that that's a serious response to a serious issue. That is part of the conversation. I think part of our issue is we look to cable news to possibly solve a problem when that's often not what it is. If you take a look at this, being able to actually get a point out, there's a reason I love radio so much. You can really develop and build a point. When you have to do something for the soundbite crowd, all you can do is utilize a soundbite to get the people who already support you to support you. That's what confirmation bias and self-affirming selective is all about. That is a real issue. That is something that cable news, and we should say broadcast news as well, and newspapers have done a terrible job of in trying to superfeed one audience as opposed to care for everyone.
Chris, I want to get to this, and it's an interesting question, something that Tony, I know, has talked about on the radio, because you and I have talked to Tony a lot about regulating big tech, what they do and do not put up. This caught our eye from Twitter. Motherboard, which is a Vice News operation, put up a tweet about how to give yourself a self-induced abortion with a drug that is available from veterinary sources because it is used to treat ulcers in horses. This would be the question. It's interesting, I haven't seen Twitter ban any of it.
They shoot it, and they...
Francis refused to meet with you when you asked to meet with him because he was upset about, I don't know, some type of action that we have. Now we understand that he says he is not sure that NATO hasn't provoked Russia into this war. He said NATO's been barking at Russia's gate. I have no way of telling no if the rage has been provoked or not, but I suspect it's been facilitated by the West attitude. Is this the West's fault?
Oh, Brian, it saddens me to hear the Catholic leader, the Pope, be so morally equivalent between Vladimir Putin, the authoritarian thug murderer, and the Ukrainian people in the West. We didn't lift a finger on offense. We've tried to support the Ukrainians in saving their own sovereignty and the lives of innocent civilian Ukrainians. To hear the Pope lose his moral way, his moral guidance. This is exactly what happened in China when the Pope was allowing the Chinese Communist Party to pick their bishops. That's what I was arguing against. I wanted him to be a moral light to the world, and he refused to meet with me simply because I had called out that desperate need for the Chinese people to have religious freedom in their country and not let the Catholic Church be co-opted by the communists. To see what he said today about NATO and about the West, about freedom-loving, rights-respecting people, and this authoritarian Vladimir Putin, to equivocate between those two, it disgusts me.
A billion Catholics deserve better. Mr. Secretary, always great and educational to talk to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian.
You got it. 25 minutes before the top of the hour now. The Ohio
of color, especially, which is the majority of what we're seeing here. I think it affects them more than any other race. And I think it's done purposely because it affects them. You know, every time there's something that goes on, every time women of color get something that makes them more equal, then it or something else is taken away. These people, they want to control everything with, all women. They want to control women, period. But women of color are the ones who are going to be affected the most by it.
According to the Kaiser Family Foundation, people of color in Mississippi comprise 44% of the population, but 81% of the women receiving abortions in the state. If the court overturns Roe v. Wade, these same women, often poor, will have the hardest time traveling to a different state to terminate a pregnancy. And it will become even more onerous for Southern women, where all of the states will have bans on abortion. Take, for example, Louisiana, which is right across the border. In 2006, Louisiana passed a trigger law that would automatically ban abortion if Roe v. Wade is overturned. The law prohibits abortion in all circumstances, with no exceptions for rape or incest. Louisiana's trigger law and the state's near complete ban on abortion would immediately take effect. One anti-choice activist in Mississippi told Yamiche that they will not stop until abortions are unavailable to every single woman in America.
We believe that we can abolish abortion in our lifetime, so we're never going to stop until abortion is fully abolished.
Joining me now from Shreveport, Louisiana, is Yamiche Alcindor, anchor and moderator of Washington Week on PBS and an MSNBC Washington correspondent. So you've been in 2 states, Yamiche, talking with both, anti-abortion activists and also with, obviously, the woman from the last abortion clinic left in Mississippi. Do you get a sense that on the side of people who want to provide these services, that there's fear about the future? What do they think the future is going to look like?
Well, Joy, I've been driving across the South since this news broke that the Supreme Court was poised to overturn Roe v. Wade. And I can tell you that not only the fear, but the concern and the devastation of people who are supportive of abortion rights is palpable. You heard Shannon Brewer say that she believes that women are going to be hurt by this, especially women of color. I also spoke to Lillian Newton. She's a 32-year-old who's had 3 abortions. She used to protest literally at this clinic, which is only one of 3 clinics in Louisiana, but she's since used this exact clinic to get her abortions, and she's become an employee. She told me that it's going to be dangerous if abortion clinics are closed in Louisiana and this region. Here's a little bit of what she had to say.
Not everyone has the ability to travel and will take matters into their own hands. And I can't say I wouldn't do the same right now if abortion access was restricted. It's already become an undue burden is very present currently in the abortion process here in the South. And it's already so difficult. It's already a waiting game. It's already expensive. Without the little access we still have, I would be lost. And I think most women would feel the same way.
And Joy, she told me over and over again that she feels privileged because she was able to get an abortion. But she said that it really is a right that is completely critical to women's lives here. In this state, women, if Roe is overturned, women would have to drive something like 12 to 13, maybe even 14 hours to get to different states like Illinois or Maryland to access abortion. So this is going to be an incredible burden, healthcare officials tell me here. I, of course, have to say that there are people who are celebrating this decision, like the young man that you pointed to. It is a culmination of the conservative movement's goals that they've been working on for more than 50 years.
And by the way, let me just note that the countries in the world that ban women from getting abortions are some of the poorest countries in the world, and the places that you are have some of the greatest poverty. These are states that don't provide even the basics in terms of health care and services, so they would make their states even poorer. It seems to be by design. One last very quick thing. I've been seeing in some of your other interviews, you've been doing really great work, that you actually spoke with activists on the anti-abortion side who said their next stop is to go after gay marriage. Can you talk a little bit about that?
That's right. I spoke to a protester who was protesting for decades outside the last abortion clinic in Mississippi. And I told him, I said, well, what would you do if this abortion clinic is closed, if you get what you want? And he told me that he would turn his gaze to same-sex marriage, that he would then start pushing the Supreme Court to abolish that. So what you have here is a conservative movement that is already focusing on the next thing, and the next thing is taking away rights from same-sex couples. And I should also say that there are people who are, of course, supporters of abortion rights who have that same fear. They're both sides in some ways are turning their gaze toward that issue. And the Senator Brewer in particular told me once you take a right away, it's very hard to get it back. So that tells you a little bit about what people on the ground here are thinking about.
And by the way, the Supreme Court decisions on gay rights and gay marriage, et cetera, all hinge on the exact same right to privacy that the abortion right did hinge on. And very quickly, Louisiana legislature is considering legislation during this year's session that would prohibit healthcare providers from remotely prescribing abortion-inducing pills over the phone, would make it illegal for such medications to be mailed. So they're going to try to stop it any way they can. Yamiche Alcindor, you're doing great work. Thank you very much. Really appreciate you. Republicans are apparently in such a little tizzy about the Supreme Court leak, they can't even find time to celebrate their big win, stripping women of the right to control their own bodies. So what's that about? Senator Tammy Duckworth joins me next.
This feeling of certainty comes from inspiring your customers and expressing heartfelt thank yous with promotional products people love from the experts at 4imprint. Enjoy that feeling of certainty at 4imprint. 4imprint, for certain.
That one is for yeast and urinary tract issues. That one restores natural feminine balance. And that one is to support odor control.
Feminine hygiene aisle, right?
Protect, maintain, and restore your vaginal health. Azo, own your day.
Oh, this one is perfect. Not as perfect as this one. That is not a mango, Lenny.
No, but this mango hint water tastes just like mango, and with no calories or sweetness.
How can water taste just like fruit?
How can our feet look just like our hands?
How can our feet look just like our hands? Hint. Water with a touch of true fruit flavor. Oh boy, I'm freaking out here.
If you've got skin that looks like this, imagine how good it would feel to see it change to this. These are real results from just one application of Crepe Erase Advanced, clinically shown to reduce the look of crepey skin on your body. Crepe Erase works instantly. Look at these results when women tried it for the very first time.
Wow. I don't see any crepe. That's like a different arm, and it's not.
With Crepe Erase, you'll see results the very first time you use it. And with daily use, your results keep getting better.
With Crepe Erase, I see my crepey skin going away. I'm not going to be wearing sleeves for a long time.
Crepe Erase is different. Here's why. Only Crepe Erase has True Firm.
A powerful botanical blend of phytonutrients derived from dill, apple, and sage. It helps support and protect skin's essential structure.
Crepe Erase is clinically shown to improve the appearance of skin texture, tone, and elasticity, and provides 48 hours of intense hydration. In fact, in a clinical study, 96% of women saw improvement in the look of crepey skin.
I can't even believe the difference it's made. Less wrinkly, less old.
Now, after using Crepe Erase, I can see such a difference.
Summer is the perfect time to show off your younger-looking skin. So don't wait. Get Crepe Erase Advanced today for only $49.95. That's an incredible offer. Order in the next 3 minutes and receive our Smooth and Renew collection free.
First, our Flaw Fix Eye Cream. Next, the Overnight Facial Plumping Treatment. Then our 4-in-1 Line Smoothing Capsules. And our Anti-Aging Hand Repair Treatment.
Get all four, a $125 value, free just for trying Crepe Erase.
Plus, you'll get free shipping and a 60-day money-back guarantee.
You can have younger-looking skin this summer. Call 1-800-552-6844 or go to
Hollywood Bowl.
Some noise for hip-hop history.
The guy's a 23-year-old man. He ran on stage with a replica handgun outfitted with a knife just before Chappelle finished his comedy set for a Netflix special. The man knocked Chappelle down, as you saw, right before security got to him. He got up and got into the beating a little bit. What is going on with these venues? You'd think the Hollywood Bowl security would be top-notch for these top-notch acts. On stage attacks, is this the new norm for comedians? What about for musical groups? They need people who have years of experience protecting celebrities now more than ever, like the guy that I have to my immediate right. He's not 6'9", he is 6'8". He is our very own Tyrus, and he has dealt with all the biggest names in sports and entertainment, from Prince to Snoop Dogg to Rick Ross and even Mike Tyson. Tyrus, author of the bestseller, #8 on the New York Times list now, Just Tyrus, a memoir, now on the New York Times list. Congratulations, Tyrus.
Thank you.
Thought about you right away after reading your book, and you have superstars that you guard. Whose fault was it that this guy, Isaiah Lee, was able to get to Dave Chappelle?
Okay, so the first thing you have to look at is the stage. And the Hollywood Bowl is a huge, I mean, you see how big that stage is. So it's a lot of ground to cover. And typically, security would be on the corner of each side. His personal security.
It's a huge stadium, yeah.
It's a huge stadium. So, but he should have had one guy on each side, and then there should have been a guy who was in the very back center, depending on what Chappelle has for security. And then, of course, there's the Hollywood Bowl's security team, which should be stationed crouching down in front of the stage. The problem you sometimes have is that security becomes part of the audience where they start watching, because after a while everybody gets comfortable. But the bodyguards have to be vigilant. I actually had to deal with a very similar situation like this with Snoop a couple times. One time in particular in Russia, where he was performing in the center of a stage, and a kid timed it, and he jumped on stage and he ran at him, and I was able to get him before he got to Snoop, and then he was dragged to the back in the same exact thing, where he ended up getting roughed up pretty good. And as I dumped him in the back, the Russian police, and they don't have issues with brutality over there. And
they're trained to be brutal.
Yeah, and he got it worse than what I gave him.
Right.
But you know, but it goes back to the security team. They have to be vigilant. So and sometimes celebrities get a little cocky too. Like Chappelle's working out, he's shredded now. He's like a Julian salad. He's not little Chappelle anymore. So he might not have had 3 or 4 bodyguards. He might have just had one. And that's just it's a tough thing with the stage.
Did the Oscars slap have anything to do with this in your mind?
The Oscar slap, Will Smith slapping him, that act didn't have to. It was the fact that what happened after the slap. He walked back to his seat. He sat down, he called him names, and there was no visible consequences. So especially with whatever this guy's issue is, whether he was mad at Chappelle or he needed to make a statement, he saw that what came from that was a lot of attention, your face on TV, and there'd be a certain groups that will support you because they'll make it sound like it was Chappelle's fault or it was Chris Rock's fault because he said a joke. So Will Smith directly emboldened the worst part of our society.
Kevin Hart, Joe Rogan, Jerry Seinfeld, the biggest names in comedy and music, do they have to reevaluate their security today?
100%. You got to beef it up, which is more expensive, and you also have to look at what the signals are being sent. When you see progressives and the woke and the extreme left who every time somebody loots or attacks something, they blame the individual. Like, well, what was Dave Chappelle wearing? What did he say that led to the attack? Which is irrelevant. They take the blame away and they make the victim of the assailant. We see it all the times with looting and stuff. They'll say, well, it's a poor neighborhood, so they should be allowed. No, absolutely not. This is why law enforcement, supporting our law enforcement is so important. Same thing with security.
And you know I love your book.
About every other month, Cabot. One. much warmer than it's been these last few mornings. Noon hour tomorrow, still in the low 50s south and east. This is because we'll have more clouds in this portion of the area, but further north and west, we'll start to gradually clear out, and we'll get back to ABC.
Look at, can I afford to go to one of the Alamo colleges? They consider whether they can afford to work less hours. And so Promise helps alleviate most or part of that consideration.
This is our first time doing TikTok advertising.
Flores and his colleagues are trying new ways to reach students and their families to let them know about the program.
I'm an Alamo Promise Scholar, so I attend college tuition-free.
They say outreach efforts have made a difference, despite the pandemic's turbulent impacts.
We were able to get 1 million total impressions, 633,000 reach.
From the fall of 2019 to the fall of 2020, when overall Texas community college enrollment declined, Alamo Promise High Schools increased their community college enrollment by 17%. Flores says college completion is just as important as increased enrollment. San Antonio College and the other community colleges offer supports to students, including free food and clothing, low-cost childcare and healthcare, and emergency financial aid for things like rent and car payments.
How are you doing?
I'm pretty well, and you?
Okay?
Students have to meet frequently with advisors to help them stay on track academically and have a plan for after they graduate. Graduation rates are tracked over a 3-year period because students often attend part-time. Next year marks the 3rd year for the first cohort of Alamo Promise recipients. Administrators say early indicators are pointing in the right direction, despite significant impacts on students' lives from COVID. Jaden Montero has his sights set on the future. He wants to pursue a career in cybersecurity and is confident he'll be able to live a comfortable life.
I'd expect to make $70,000 a year, which is more than good enough for me.
About 13,000 students are eligible for the Promise program next fall, and so far, more than 10,000 have shown an interest and saved their seat. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Hari Srinivasan in San Antonio, Texas.
Roxane Gay has long used writing as a means to untangle and communicate her own trauma. Now a successful author, professor, and mentor to so many, she advises aspiring writers on how to harness their voices. Tonight, Gay shares her brief but spectacular take on ways of being heard as part of our ongoing arts and culture series, Canvas.
A lot of times people ask me about voice and how to find it, as if they can go on some sort of search and find voice waiting for them at the end of it. But in fact, we tend to already have our voices, and it's really a question of learning how to use our voices and knowing that we have every right to do so. I started writing when I was 4 years old. I would draw little villages on napkins, and then I would write stories about the people living in those villages. I think and write quite a lot about trauma. Few of us know how to talk about it because we have very little language for trauma. People seem to want us to have these triumphant stories, and there's not a lot of space for the in-between where you've suffered and you're healed, but things are maybe also not okay. When I wrote my memoir, Hunger, which was a memoir of my body, I was extremely worried about how it would be received because it required a level of vulnerability I found extremely uncomfortable to write about a fat body while living in it without some sort of triumphant weight loss narrative. And I certainly didn't think anyone but other fat people would gravitate toward the book, but as I was touring it, not only in this country, but all around the world, I found that everybody lives in a body that is complicated and that they struggle with at one time or another. I think a lot of people are looking for language to talk about that. In general, to write about most anything personal, I tell myself that no one's going to read my work. I was terrified when I wrote Hunger. I just did it anyway. I did it despite the fear. And to have my story connect with so many people in so many different kinds of bodies was really overwhelming, and it reminded me of what great writing can do. Oftentimes when we think about trauma, we think about it in the context of the personal, but we deal with collective traumas all of the time. We are currently in the second year of a collective trauma, a pandemic that in the United States has resulted in the deaths of 800,000 people. And most of us have no idea how to grapple with that level of loss, with the fact that nearly 1 million people have simply disappeared from our daily lives. There are things that we really do need to sit with and spend more time with to fully make sense of. And so a lot of my current work is about how do we reckon with these collective traumas. I'm often asked, particularly by young women, how they can be less angry in their writing, as if anger is a bad thing. And what I love to tell these women, and what I also remind myself, is that anger is oftentimes incredibly appropriate when you're writing about sexual violence, misogyny, all of the issues that feminists are trying to address in our work. Anger can be incredibly productive, and I hope to encourage them to find ways to use anger for the greater good and to see it as an asset rather than a liability. My name is Roxanne Gay, and this is my brief but spectacular take on ways of being heard.
And you can watch more brief but spectacular videos online at pbs.org/newshour/brief. And that is the News Hour for tonight. I'm Jeff Bennett. Join us.
The incident happening after she says she made a comment about an old tattoo on his arm.
I didn't know what to do. You would think you would have a response, but I, as a woman, had never been hit like that. I'm an adult, and I'm sitting next to the man I love, and he slapped me for no reason, it seemed like. All of a sudden, realizing that the worst thing has just happened to me that could possibly happen to you.
Heard also testified that she knew she should leave Depp, but could not follow through.
He seemed so sorry, but I knew I couldn't just forgive him because right? That means it will happen again, no? You know, like I've seen the health class videos, like everyone else.
Well, the jury listened to allegations of sexual abuse by Depp that Heard says happened at a trailer park resort during what she characterized as a drug-filled rage.
I kind of froze. I don't know how we went to bed that night. I don't know how I went to bed. I don't know how I slept.
And it was a stark contrast to how Heard described the beginning of her relationship with Depp.
I felt that, like, when I was around Johnny, I felt like the most beautiful person in the whole world. You know, it made me feel seen, made me feel like $1 million. And that kind of feeling where, you know, he's just lavish gifts and lavish expressions of love, and how he had never met a woman like me.
Well, Depp is suing Heard for $50 million in damages over a 2018 essay she wrote for the Washington Post, in which she said she had become the public figure representing domestic abuse. And we should mention that Heard is countersuing Depp for $100 million in damages as well. She returns to the stand tomorrow. Brian?
Wow. Laura, thanks so much. Meanwhile, you want to know
inhaler,
specials, who is Amber Heard and who is Johnny Depp?
It won't replace a rescue inhaler for sudden breathing problems.
Pill proven to deliver significant relief from bipolar depression. Unlike
Michael Buffer speaks like that all the time.
In our region.
That's been saving people money for nearly 60 years. For a great low rate and nearly.
It's going to be going into effect. The Dakota News Now First Alert Weather Team is your first source for your local weather coverage, so you can prepare for your outdoor.
Can't get much higher.
A lot of people don't.
Covering stories in KELO means getting out from behind the anchor desk. It means going to the newsmakers wherever they are. Going the extra mile to uncover the facts face to face. Not only reading, but reporting the news. It means putting the most experienced journalists on the biggest stories. KELO News is reporting, no matter which desk you sit behind. KELO TV, your home for news.
Pay attention to the weather situation tonight and have a way to get your warnings. To the north, we've got a warm front. That's kind of the northern extent of the unstable air, but the warm front itself adds a little bit of extra spin, and we've had confirmed tornadoes along that boundary. To the west, we've got a dry line with dry air surging out of the desert southwest, moving into some of the most unstable air of the entire southern plains. And so big storms, huge hail, and confirmed tornadoes in that area as well. So it is a very busy evening. Want to go into both of those areas for you, get you up to speed, make sure you stay ahead of these storms and know the threats that are coming your way. We'll start things off along that I-40 corridor, where Seminole just had a tornado come through the area and is now on the east side of the region. Yes, observed tornado within this area. This observed tag right in here, there for a reason. We've got spotters in the area, and this is now starting to be more rain-wrapped. In fact, the inflow notch is coming in.
Grow up or stop drinking. Meanwhile, that's it for Jesse Watters Primetime tonight. I was Brian Kilmeade throughout the show. Join me on Fox and Friends in a few hours from 6 to 9. My radio show from 9 to noon. And don't forget to watch One Nation coming up at 8 o'clock on Saturday, repeated at 11. Listen now for the snare drums in 5 seconds. Then that'll mean Tucker Carlson will appear on your screen, just his torso. Watch.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. It's hard to think of a topic in American life that's more divisive than abortion. Abortion's in the news today, obviously, but most Americans, no matter where they stand on it or how passionately they feel about it, don't really want to talk about it because it's just too painful. So with that in mind, for once tonight, we're going to open this show with an issue that unites all of us, and it's democracy. Everybody in America is for democracy. Democracy is the basis of our political system. Both parties support democracy strongly. They often say so. And of course, the alternative to democracy is bad. It's tyranny, and nobody's for that. So it's heartening to learn that preserving democracy is the main idea, really the only idea, behind Justice Samuel Alito's draft opinion on the Roe v. Wade decision. Virtually everyone in the country has heard about Alito's 98-page opinion since it was leaked on Monday night to Politico. And yet, at the same time, for all the talking about it, almost nobody seems to have any idea what is in it.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. You know, I think anyone who pays close attention to politics, whether you're a journalist who covers it like I do, or you're an active news consumer or practitioner, anyone in that category knows the Republican Party wants to overturn Roe versus Wade. They want to make most, if not all, abortions illegal in the states they control, and as evidenced by their voting record in Congress and the country as a whole. They, by and large, do not want any exceptions for rape or incest. Most of the laws that have been passing recently don't have them. They want to criminalize the act, leaving doctors and maybe even in some cases women who seek abortion open to prosecution. And so in that sense, arriving at this point where we have in black and white a leaked draft Supreme Court opinion that wholly overturns Roe and would abolish the right to an abortion, that is not surprising. But of course, here's the thing. Most people in a country of 330 million people do not pay very close attention to politics. In fact, most voters don't.
And people and their elected representatives, end quote. Now, as a factual matter, not that facts seem to matter too much, but if you cared about them, you couldn't really argue with that claim because the Constitution does not, in fact, prohibit American voters from banning abortion, or for that
or most cases, and that number has held steady for the past few years. That's a 20-point margin, right? I mean, if you pull on Roe v. Wade, all this stuff, it's fairly consistent over time. Now, Republicans know this, and so they became more squirrely about what they were up to, even as they pursued their goal of overturning abortion rights with even more dogged tenacity. And to be clear, this moment was 50 years in the making. And like all catastrophes, if it comes to pass, and I don't know for sure that it will and hope it doesn't, it will be the product of a whole bunch of things that had to go wrong at the same time. That's the
It's like a member of their family.
Bombshell news for Lauderdale County Sheriff Rick Singleton and his
other child, so I religiously took my daily contraceptive pill. Despite that, I became pregnant. I consulted with my doctors who told me that any future pregnancy would likely also be high risk to me and the child, similar to what I had gone through with Janak. I very much wanted to have more children, but I simply could not imagine going through that again. After discussions with my partner, who was completely supportive of whatever choice I made, I decided to have an abortion. For me, terminating my pregnancy was not an easy choice, the most difficult I've made in my life, but it was my choice. And that is what must be preserved for every pregnant person.
Well, just before air tonight, I spoke with Congresswoman Jayapal about the Supreme Court's draft decision as well as her own decision to share her story. Congresswoman, thanks so much for joining us. I know this is obviously deeply personal for you. I'm wondering how your own experience shaped your view of abortion rights being in jeopardy right now.
Well, Anderson, I have always been a supporter of abortion rights, but when I had to go through the experience itself, it gave me a whole different perspective on the nuances and the complexities of making a decision like this, and also the incredible importance of having it be for nobody else to make except the pregnant person. Because at the end of the day, we are the people that know what we're dealing with. Nobody could have known the incredibly difficult situation that I had had with my first child being born just 1 pound, 14 ounces. I mean, literally, she was this big, the size of a small squash. And I had so many issues for months with not even knowing if she was going to live or die. And so to then have somebody else tell me that I have to have a government-mandated pregnancy when I knew that I was not in a position to do that, I think all came into sharp focus. And so now today, I see so many stories, and there isn't a good story, a good abortion story, or a bad abortion story. It's just the choice that women have to make about their own bodies, and nobody else should be involved in that other than our doctors and our loved ones.
Well, what do you think would have happened to you back then if a ban had been in place?
Well, you know, I live in a state, Washington State, where we have protected the right to choose. But let's say I wasn't in this state. I wouldn't have been able to get an abortion unless I had had the money. I probably could have scraped together the money for it if I think about it now, but it's not like I was in a situation where that would have been easy. And on top of that, I would have had to try and find somewhere that would do an abortion, because I was not in a place where I could have had another baby. And my life would have been at risk, the baby's life potentially at risk. And so it's not like banning abortion would get rid of abortions. It would just get rid of safe and legal abortions. People would continue to have abortions. And I think that is the other thing that we really need to think about, because this Supreme Court majority, 5 justices who were appointed by 2 presidents who did not even get the majority of the popular vote, are trying to mandate that we carry a pregnancy. I'm not telling anyone to have an abortion. I don't think anyone should tell me to not have one.
With the filibuster in place, though, Democrats don't have the votes in the Senate to codify Roe into law. So where does that leave you?
Well, I think 3 things. 1, we can bring it to the floor and get people on the record. 2, there are some Republicans, women, who said that they supported the right to a woman's right to choose, who confirmed some of these Supreme Court justices who lied to them. And I think we should really appeal to them to be on the right side of history and to join us in a carve out to the filibuster, and then we would have 51 votes. So that's the second piece. And if all of that fails, then Anderson, obviously it's to the ballot boxes. And in any situation, I think it's important for people to understand that the Alito opinion as it was written and leaked, if that is really the opinion that stands, makes a stunning argument. It makes the argument that if something was not designated as a right, actually specified in the Constitution of 200 years ago, then it is not a right today. And that is true of privacy as it relates to abortion, but also as it relates to any number of other issues. Same-sex marriage, but how about interracial marriage? How about all of the things that we have considered settled law that now could be overturned? So I think this obviously is something that will animate people in November at the election booth.
I guess the argument from some conservatives on that is, well, even though the Supreme Court had ruled, had passed Roe v. Wade, it still wasn't their argument is that it wasn't necessarily settled law in that it still was an issue that divided the country. It wasn't that there was a overwhelming majority of Americans that everybody was on the same page in supporting it.
I found that to be one of the most ludicrous arguments that was being made, because are they saying that by overturning Roe v. Wade that somehow we're going to have a more cordial discussion around this, that somehow this is going to bring the country together? That, I thought, was a really disingenuous statement from Alito. And I would just say, actually, this overturning Roe v. Wade is way out of step with the country. The polling is anywhere from 59 to 70% of Americans, depending on which poll you look at, supports maintaining Roe v. Wade. This is not a partisan issue. This is about freedom for women to make choices about our own bodies.
Congresswoman Pramila, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Anderson.
Let's look at some of the politics of all of this. David Axelrod joins us, former senior advisor to President Obama and a CNN senior political commentator and CNN chief political analyst, Gloria Borger, as well. David, what does it say to you that most Republicans, after wanting to repeal Roe v. Wade for decades, right now seem to prefer to focus on the leak of the draft opinion from the Supreme Court, not the actual pending overturning of the constitutional right to an abortion?
It says that they're the dogs that caught the car, basically. I don't think that they wanted this result right now. If I were a strategist in their councils, this would have landed very badly because they know how divisive this issue is. They think they've got this election under control, the midterm elections. Now comes this decision, and it does threaten to galvanize constituencies who it appeared were disinterested in the election or less interested than others, particularly younger voters who in large numbers oppose this measure. So I think that they do not want to talk about the substance of this because it is politically inconvenient for them.
Gloria, do you think Republicans avoiding the actual implications of repealing Roe v. Wade in large part or decrying the leak and pivoting to the economy is a smart strategy?
Well, I think it's the only strategy they have when you have 70% of the American public saying that, you know, we ought to keep Roe v. Wade as it is and keep it on the books. And so what they're doing is talking about the leak instead of Roe v. Wade. But it's kind of ludicrous in a way that they're doing it because, of course, they've been using cultural issues as a way to get at the Democrats, the woke Democrats, et cetera, et cetera. If there ever was a cultural issue, it's abortion. And now they're leaning away from it because we're close to the midterm elections, and they know that it's going to bring out those young voters that David is talking about. It's going to bring out suburban women. You know, whether it'll be enough to get Democrats some more seats, we just don't know. But it certainly will close that enthusiasm gap that the Democrats currently have.
David, the Democratic Senator from West Virginia, Joe Manchin, was asked today if he thinks the abortion rights will be the driving issue for the midterms. Here's what he said.
Inflation is the #1 driving factor, I believe, in my state. Right now, it's hurting everybody, not just at the pump, but at the grocery store, at the drugstore.
Do you think he's right?
Yeah, I mean, I do think inflation is probably top on people's list of concerns. I think that it would be a mistake to say this issue is going to supersede all others on the minds of most voters. The question is, will it bring people to the polls who otherwise wouldn't have come, for whom this is the #1 voting issue? And I think that's the question. I think Democrats would make a mistake if they become monomaniacal about this issue. Clearly, it's an important issue. It's a seismic event. But right now, people go to the gas pumps every day. They go to the grocery stores every day. And they have other concerns. And so Democrats have to walk and chew gum at the same time. They need to make this case. They need to use it to galvanize their constituencies. But they also need to address these other issues. And it'd be a mistake not to.
Yeah, Gloria, there's a CNN poll that came out today saying the economy is far and away the most important issue to voters. Abortion is being connected by some Democrats to economic issues as well, given the U.S. has no universal paid leave or universal child care. Do you think Democrats can effectively tie the two together?
Well, they're going to try. I was talking to a Democratic pollster today about this, and I said, well, how can Democrats use this? They have to talk about the economy, too, as David is saying. And he said, look, this can't be just organic. I mean, this just can't be, oh, sometimes you mention it and sometimes you don't mention it. What it has to be is, you know, they have to lean into it And at every chance, yes, they talk about the economy, but they also have to try and portray Republican candidates, particularly in the Senate, as radical, because this is a policy that is removing a law that's been on the books for 50 years, and say, if you vote for this candidate, you are voting for radical policy, and here are the implications of that policy. So you have to do both. You have to say, this is how we help you as voters, but also this is how the Republican Party is going down a radical path that you may not be able to come back from for decades. And he says that's the way to kind of move on it, but you can't just do it here and there. You have to do it right in candidates' faces.
Gloria Borger, David Axelrod. Go ahead, David.
Can I just add one thing to that? I think that one of the things people are sensing right now is there's a sense of chaos out there. There's a sense that things are disorderly. Right. This is a very, very upheaval. This is a big upheaval here, and I think connecting Republicans to that and predicting what the future might be, not a calming influence, but a further roiling influence, has some promise for Democrats, but it's going to be tough.
David Axelrod, Gloria Borger, thanks. Just ahead, the breaking news that we mentioned at the top of the broadcast is Ukraine.